Hello everyone. I'm out here in the tent today because it's a cold day in Oklahoma. I don't know, we got some major storms, tornadoes and stuff moving in later. But I come across an article in my Anti-Racism 3 class, and I wanted to share some of the points that it made because I think it opens eyes if people are willing to actually pay attention and look around them, which I know we do here, but there's a lot of people out there that don't. The article is called Seeing the Water: 7 Values Targets for Anti-Racism Action. And the 7 targets is narrow focus on the individual, a historical stance, myth of meritocracy, myth of zero-sum game, limited future orientation, myth of American exceptionalism, and white supremacist ideology. Now, it says we already know many of the structural targets for anti-racism action: residential segregation by race, funding of public schools based on local property taxes, over-policing of communities of color, disproportionate incarceration of black and brown people, communities of color as environmental sacrifice zones. So there's a lot of things that come up when we hear the word racism or race. There's a lot of it that we don't put 2 and 2 together. And the first part of this article says, you know the old saying, it's hard for a fish to see the water in which it swims. That's true. And in the United States, we are all swimming through a polluted ocean. I personally think it's worldwide. I don't think it's just the United States, although I do admit, as an American, I see it greatly here, and probably more so than many other countries. More of us are starting to see the icebergs and reefs that structure our watery landscape, in part because we are starting to understand that the wreckage that they cause is not natural. But we have been slower to see the water, and we need to see both, because it is the very murkiness of this water in which we swim that makes it hard for us to see the structures that harm and divide us. We swim in an ocean of racism. Racism is the system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race, that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities while unfairly advantaging other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. There is a lot of pearls in that one sentence definition. First, that racism is a system, not an individual character flaw, not a personal moral failing, not even a psychiatric illness, but a system of power. Second, that so-called race, the substrate on which racism operates, is not in our genes, but is a social interpretation of how one looks in a race-conscious society. Third, that racism has 3 impacts: unfairly disadvantaging some while unfairly advantaging others, but also sapping the truth and the strength of the whole society that society through the waste of human resources. And finally, that racism operates in 2 ways, both by structuring opportunity and by assigning value. Now, to the extent that we deny racism, we are endorsing the myth of mediocrity and blaming folks who do not make it, labeling them as lazy or stupid. There are many ways to deny racism. One way is to say racism does not exist. Another way is to never say the word racism. Because even if we are talking about disparities or disproportionalities or diverse equity and inclusion, or implicit or unconscious bias, or cultural competence, or structural competence, or even race, If we never say the word racism in our national context of widespread racism denial, we are complicit with that denial. That makes a good point. Being on the track of anti-racism is not something that we can reach the end goal to. It's always going to be there. You can put little dots on a map all over the place, and each dot can represent a new stance against some form of racism or discrimination. And there is always going to be room to put more dots. This is a mapping that has no destination, but we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep moving forward and stop racism, and it does not matter what country we are in. So I hope you take a little bit of time to think this over, and if you agree that stopping racism is very important in whatever country that you are in, please don't be afraid to say the word racism. Simply say it. Just comment the word racism in the comments below. Thank you.